Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are taking on a really comprehensive and I think deeply rooted document. The Apostolic Exhortation Dilexi Te, or I Have Loved You. Now, this text, issued by Pope Leo XIV, it holds a pretty unique place. It explicitly builds on and, completes text started by his predecessor, Pope Francis.
And that continuity is so important. It really gets to the heart of the document's mission. We're diving into this core conviction that love for the poor is not, some optional charity project.
Right.
It's the absolute center of Christian identity, and it's rooted in Christ's own life and words. Our goal is to really pull out how this mandate moves beyond just sentiment and into, practical structural care.
And the title itself is it's instantly gripping. I have loved you. It's a phrase from Revelation, and it's addressed to a community that's described as having, quote, no influence or resources, and was treated instead with violence and contempt.
Yeah.
I just find that so challenging that love is declared most strongly to those who have but little power.
It completely flips the script. It reframes poverty, weakness, marginalization, not as, proof that God is absent, but as the very place of intense divine attention.
Exactly.
So we're going to trace how this document demands that we translate this theological principle, Christ's deep identification with the suffering, into a full, inescapable social and spiritual mandate for the Church and for you, the listener.
All right, so let's maybe start at the source, Scripture. The exhortation kicks things off by grounding the whole discussion in the gospel, specifically referencing that moment when the disciples complained about the woman pouring costly oil on Jesus' head.
Matthew 26, right. They argued the money should have gone to the poor.
Exactly. And Jesus responds with that famous line, "You always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me."
And the text is so careful to clarify this. Jesus wasn't minimizing the poor at all. He was confirming that these small gestures of, costly affection and adoration for those who suffer, like the woman's gesture for the suffering Messiah, are inherently valuable. They last.
So the point is that love, especially for the suffering, is never an economic waste.
Never. And that leads right into the theological concept of God's preferential option for the poor, which, is a phrase that can sometimes be really misunderstood.
It can sound like a zero-sum game, can't it? Implying exclusivity.
It can, but the document is crystal clear on this point. It stresses that this preference is based on God's profound compassion for our weakness, for our poverty. It, quote, never indicates exclusivity or discrimination.
So it's a theological preference.
Exactly. It means that in the kingdom Christ came to build, those who are most marginalized and discriminated against, they hold a special place in his heart, simply because they're the most vulnerable.
And Jesus didn't just teach this, he lived it. We sometimes gloss over just how specific his own poverty was.
We do. The document highlights his birth in humble surroundings, the flight to Egypt, his profession as a tekton,
which we translate as carpenter, but it was more than that, right?
Oh, yeah. A tekton was a craftsman, a laborer, a status that was often considered inferior, especially to, say, established farmers in that province. It meant physical work, instability, low social status.
And even his parents' offering at the temple.
A care of turtle doves. The sacrifice prescribed specifically for the poor under Mosaic law.
He had no permanent home. The Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head, and I think this is so significant. He allowed his disciples to glean grain in the fields.
A practice legally reserved only for the desperately poor. I mean, it's a remarkable summary of radical identification. Jesus didn't just visit the poor.
He lived as one of them.
He manifested a privilegium pauperum, a privileged position of the poor in his own life. And this wasn't just, asceticism, it was strategic. It perfectly positioned him to announce his mission in Nazareth. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to bring good news to the poor.
And that good news, as the document really emphasizes, it's about the whole person. It's not just spiritual consolation.
No, absolutely not. The liberation mission is physical and spiritual. It's opening the eyes of the blind, healing lepers, restoring dignity. It is the tangible proclamation that God is near, God loves you.
So that's the model the Church has to replicate.
That's the model. It has to be a church that walks poor among the poor, showing that God is intimately involved in the suffering of the world.
Okay, so let's transition to the present day. Dilexi Te argues that the cry of the poor has become Well, incredibly complex. It's not just about lacking money anymore.
Not at all. The modern definition is so much more expansive. It's social marginalization, a lack of voice, of dignity. It's moral and spiritual poverty, cultural exclusion, a lack of rights, of freedom.
They're all interconnected.
Deeply interconnected. You can have money but still be marginalized, and that is a real form of poverty.
What's alarming is the paradox the document points out. Well, global commitments to eradicate poverty have grown. There's still just not enough. And new, more subtle forms of poverty are popping up. Why does it persist like this?
Well, the document lays the blame squarely on a critique of systemic indifference. It describes a wealthy elite living in a, quote, bubble of comfort and luxury.
Completely detached.
Completely. And this fosters a culture that discards others without even realizing it. They specifically mention the crisis of food and water globally, but then immediately they pivot to the reality in wealthy nations.
Right, like the growing number of families in Europe who just can't make it to the end of the month.
Exactly. So this is a condemnation of structural economic arrangements. It's not just about individuals not being charitable enough.
It has to be. And that leads to this rejection of certain ideological prejudices.
It does. The document explicitly confronts the specious view of meritocracy.
The idea that the poor somehow don't deserve otherwise because they haven't worked hard enough or made the right choices.
And the text just flatly rejects that. It rejects the idea that poverty is some blind and cruel fate and points out that so many poor people work diligently from dawn till dusk just to scrape by.
That critique it's pretty radical because it challenges a foundational assumption of a lot of Western societies, that success is purely an individual thing.
Precisely. If society is structured in a way that makes upward mobility nearly impossible for entire groups of people, then individual effort is not the sole determinant of destiny. It can't be. And then the document draws special attention to the suffering of what it calls doubly poor women. They face exclusion, mistreatment, violence, and yet they are often the pillars of their families.
Showing impressive examples of daily heroism.
Right, and to ignore their systemic vulnerability is a moral failure that goes way beyond simple economic policy. And this focus on dignity and practical care, it's not some modern invention. It's a legacy the Church has maintained for 2 millennia, and the exhortation really brings this history to life.
You see it right from the very beginning with the apostles. The first community immediately sets up the diaconia, the institution of service, specifically to make sure widows were fed.
The most vulnerable group at the time.
It wasn't an optional ministry. It was integral to the Church's structure from day one.
And that idea just crystallizes so dramatically in the story of St. Lawrence, the deacon in Rome. When the Roman authorities command him to hand over the treasures of the Church, he gathers the community's sick, disabled, and destitute. And his famous reply, "These are the treasures of the Church."
That wasn't just defiance, was it?
No, it was a profound resacralization of humanity. He was declaring that the true value of the faith lay in the people whom the world had completely rejected.
The Church Fathers then follow this up with, just striking clarity. That quote from St. John Chrysostom it's astonishingly radical.
It's blunt, isn't it? Not giving to the poor is stealing from them, defrauding them of their lives because what we have belongs to them.
Just think about the implications of that statement.
He's suggesting that wealth beyond what you need is inherently communal. It shifts almsgiving from, paternalistic generosity to an act of justice restored, which is how St. Ambrose and Augustine taught it.
The poor aren't just recipients of charity.
No, they are the sacramental presence of the Lord, and our interaction with them is the acid test of our true worship.
And this tradition just flows directly into the massive cultural influence of monasticism. Figures like St. Basil the Great designed monasteries not just for contemplation,
but as centers of social welfare. They provided healing, hospitality, education. They created what the text calls an economy of solidarity.
So work was seen as necessary not just for the monks themselves,
but specifically to generate a surplus to help the needy outside the monastery walls. But then the really monumental shift came in the 13th century, the Mendicant Revolution with St. Francis and St. Clare.
And this wasn't just about providing services anymore. This was radical imitation.
Exactly. They moved from giving charity to being poor. St. Francis wanted to imitate Christ, poor and naked, living a life totally reliant on divine providence.
And St. Clare's act was even more potent.
She fought for and obtained the privilegium paupertatis, the formal right to live without any material goods. This was a statement that total trust in God was the Church's ultimate security, not wealth or property.
The document also mentions the extension of this into truly dangerous service, citing the Trinitarians and Mercedarians.
Yeah, whose whole mission was freeing captives, often by offering their own lives or fortunes as ransom.
Which takes the idea of seeing Christ's flesh in the suffering to its ultimate conclusion.
The most logical and literal conclusion, yes, it's a direct application of Christ's redemptive sacrifice. If Christ gave his life to free us, then these orders gave their lives to free the imprisoned. It shows that every human life has infinite worth, no matter their status.
The sheer depth of that historical commitment really laid the groundwork for the modern evolution of the Church's social teaching. And that's our next segment. It all formally starts, really, with Leo XIII's Rerum Novarum in the late 19th century.
Which was the initial formal recognition that the Church had a specific role to play in economic justice, in the labor question. But the crucial shift in self-understanding came with St. John XXIII.
Who famously said just before Vatican II that the Church wished to be the Church of the poor?
Exactly. And the Council, in Gaudium et Spes, it cemented two, well, radical legal concepts.
The universal destination of earthly goods and the social function of property. These are heavy concepts.
Oh, they are revolutionary. The universal destination of goods asserts that the Earth's resources are intended for everyone, period.
And the social function of property.
That acts as a limit on private ownership. It stresses that no one is authorized to, quote, appropriate surplus goods solely for his own private use when others lack the bare necessities of life.
So it fundamentally reframes private property rights from being absolute to being conditional.
Conditional on the needs of the human family, yes. It's a staggering claim that runs directly counter to a lot of capitalist premises.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, following Vatican II, the text highlights the huge influence of Latin America, particularly the conferences of Medellin and Puebla.
This is where we see the theological vocabulary really deepen. These conferences identified structures of injustice as a social sin,
which moves the focus from just individual acts of charity
to the societal systems that actually create and perpetuate poverty. They harshly denounced the dictatorship of an economy that kills, which rejects any state control or ethical oversight for the sake of pure market autonomy.
So if poverty is a social sin, the remedy has to be structural change, not just bigger welfare checks.
Exactly right. And this led to the pivotal concept that was explored at the Apostolic Conference. The poor as subjects of evangelization, not just objects of our charity.
We have to see them as communities capable of creating their own culture.
And possessing a mysterious wisdom that we often lack. The challenge is that we must let ourselves be evangelized by them.
That's such a powerful idea. If they have a mysterious wisdom, it means we have something essential to learn from their experience, not just something essential to give to them.
It implies that surviving, even thriving, in the face of economic devastation gives them insights into human nature, into trust that those of us in our bubbles of comfort just cannot access.
And this recognition extends to everyone on the existential peripheries, especially migrants.
Right, and the document uses the examples of St. John Baptist Scalabrini and St. Francis Xavier Cabrini, the patroness of all migrants, to make this point.
Their work exemplifies the mandate
to welcome, protect, promote, and integrate the stranger. The Church's credibility, the exhortation argues, really hinges on translating the proclamation of Christ's love into these concrete gestures of closeness for those on the margins.
Looking at this entire historical and theological mandate, the document ultimately feels like a direct challenge to the great moral failing of our time. Indifference.
It really does.
It brings us right back to the parable of the Good Samaritan.
And that parable is terrifying in this context, because it reveals that the greatest moral danger isn't cruelty, it's just walking by. The document warns we are becoming illiterate when it comes to accompanying the frail.
It frames indifference as a disease.
A symptom of an unhealthy society that chases prosperity while deliberately turning its back on suffering.
So if the ultimate goal is human dignity, the text then reaffirms the primacy of work. Giving someone a good job is presented as the most important way to help.
Absolutely. Human work is a key, probably the essential key to the whole social question. Work restores self-worth, community, autonomy. It is the primary way to overcome poverty with dignity. We have to solve the structural causes, not just offer provisional welfare.
But where work isn't possible, disability, illness, lack of opportunity, almsgiving is still necessary. How does the document make sure this isn't just a simple handout?
It redefines it. It redefines almsgiving as a means of contact, of encounter. It's a chance to halt before the poor, to look into their eyes, to touch them.
So the point isn't the transaction.
No, it's the human connection. That simple act, softens the hardened hearts of the giver, and injects a necessary touch of pitas of reverence and empathy back into society.
So the final call is to action, to make sure these convictions don't just stay trapped in our heads as theoretical ideals.
Works of love, concrete actions, that's what keeps these theological convictions alive. If we just limit ourselves to academic arguments without any tangible commitment, we risk falling into the very spiritual worldliness the exhortation so strongly condemns.
This has been a truly expansive deep dive. We've covered everything from Christ's radical self-impoverishment and the startling claims of the Church Fathers, all the way through to the modern analysis of structural sin and the need for justice.
And the bedrock principle, this idea of the flesh of Christ, binds it all together.
So the key takeaway for you, the listener, is this. Love for the poor is not some optional add-on or a charitable side project.
It is the evangelical hallmark of a church faithful to the heart of God. And the distinction from secular humanitarian work is profound. We do this not just because it's a good ethical action, but because in serving the suffering, we are recognizing and serving Christ himself.
It really demands a complete conversion of perspective.
It does. And if we go back to that powerful idea of the mysterious wisdom, the poor possess wisdom gained by surviving in the most adverse conditions, trusting when no one else takes them seriously, we face a serious challenge.
A personal one.
A very personal one. If the poor have learned things about life, resilience, and faith that the comfortable have not, then what concrete essential wisdom are you personally forfeiting? What are you failing to receive by maintaining a distance from the most vulnerable members of your own community?
That's a question that should drive both reflection and action. The ultimate promise of this exhortation is that through our commitment to change unjust structures and through simple heartfelt gestures of recognition, the poor will realize Jesus' words are addressed personally to them. I have loved you.